The air in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. on that sweltering July afternoon in 1937 was thick with the scent of aged paper, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the high, arched windows. It was a smell Arthur Albright knew intimately, a comforting, scholarly aroma that spoke of forgotten histories and untold truths. Arthur, a man of meticulous habits and an almost obsessive dedication to the minutiae of historical record-keeping, ran a gloved hand over the spine of a leather-bound ledger. His spectacles, perched precariously on his nose, reflected the dim glow of the reading lamp on his desk. He was deep into a project, a comprehensive cross-referencing of the 1890 census data with subsequent state and federal records, a task most would find mind-numbingly dull, but which Arthur approached with the zeal of an archaeologist unearthing a lost civilization. For weeks, he had been sifting through box after box of microfilm schedules, comparing names, addresses, occupations, and family structures. The sheer volume of information was staggering, a testament to a nation in rapid expansion, attempting to quantify its burgeoning population. Arthur found a quiet satisfaction in the order he brought to this chaos, in connecting the dots of individual lives across decades. He believed that every name, every entry, represented a life lived, a story, however small, that deserved its place in the grand tapestry of American history. It was on a particularly humid Tuesday, the kind where the very air felt heavy and resistant, that he stumbled upon it. A series of census schedules, bound together with a brittle, faded ribbon, tucked away in a box labeled Miscellaneous Western Territories, Unprocessed. The label itself was an anomaly. By 1890, most territories had well-established processing protocols. He carefully untied the ribbon, the paper crackling softly like dry leaves under his touch. The first few pages were standard, detailing small, isolated homesteads in what would soon become Wyoming and Montana. Names like Johnson, Peterson, Smith, familiar, unremarkable. Then he turned a page, and the familiar rhythm of his work faltered. The handwriting was distinct, a neat, almost elegant script, yet firm and precise. The location listed was Havenwood Settlement, Unorganized Territory, Wyoming-Montana border. Arthur frowned. He had spent years studying the cartography of the late 19th century, the shifting lines of states and territories, the rise and fall of countless frontier towns. Havenwood was not a name he recognized. He consulted his atlases, his gazetteers, his extensive collection of territorial maps. Nothing. No Havenwood. Not in any official record, not in any historical survey. It was as if the place simply did not exist. His initial reaction was one of professional curiosity, a puzzle to be solved. Perhaps it was a temporary camp, a logging or mining operation that had since vanished. But as he continued to read, a prickle of unease began to crawl up his spine. The schedules for Havenwood were unusually detailed, listing not just names and ages but also condition of health, date of arrival, and a peculiar column marked observation status. The entries in this column were almost uniformly active or ongoing. What kind of census recorded observation status? He counted the names. 214 individuals, men, women, children, entire families. The ages ranged from infants to the elderly. Each name was meticulously recorded: Caleb Miller, Ilara Finch, Thomas Davies, Margaret Griggs, Samuel Sutter, William Bowen. They were real people, with real ages and real, if somewhat vague, occupations listed as community support or domestic duties. But where were they? And why was there no trace of Havenwood? Arthur spent the rest of the afternoon cross-referencing. He pulled up the official 1890 census records for the surrounding counties in Wyoming and Montana. He checked land deeds, homestead claims, birth and death certificates from the period. He even delved into military records, searching for any mention of a settlement or a detachment assigned to such a remote location. The results were always the same: a resounding silence. The 214 individuals listed in the Havenwood schedules did not appear anywhere else. Their names were absent from every official document, every public record, every historical account he could access. They were ghosts on paper, meticulously catalogued, yet utterly erased from the official narrative of the nation. The more he searched, the deeper the mystery became, and the more unsettling the implications. It wasn't just a missing town, it was 214 missing lives. How could an entire community, large enough to warrant its own census schedules, simply vanish without a trace? Who was the enumerator who had recorded them? And why had these particular schedules been relegated to an unprocessed box, seemingly forgotten for nearly half a century? The dust in the archives, once a comforting presence, now felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if it held secrets too profound to be disturbed. Arthur felt a growing sense of responsibility, a quiet determination to bring these forgotten names back into the light. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had stumbled upon something far more significant than a mere historical anomaly. He had found a void, a deliberate erasure, and the implications of such an act were chilling. If this story has piqued your curiosity, and you're finding yourself drawn into this historical enigma, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten tales like this one. Arthur Albright's initial professional curiosity quickly morphed into a consuming obsession. The anomalous census schedules for Havenwood Settlement became his singular focus, eclipsing all other archival duties. He felt a profound, almost spiritual connection to the 214 names meticulously penned on those brittle pages. They were not just data points. They were individuals whose very existence had been systematically denied, and Arthur, with his quiet, scholarly demeanor, felt an urgent duty to restore their place in history. His investigation began with the handwriting. The enumerator's script was distinctive, elegant yet firm, with a particular flourish on the capital H and a precise, almost artistic loop on the G. It was the hand of someone educated, perhaps even refined, certainly not the rough scrawl often found in frontier records. Arthur spent days poring over other 1890 census documents, comparing scripts, searching for a match. He eventually found it in a small, unassuming box containing the personal effects of deceased federal employees whose families had donated their papers to the archives. The box was labeled Elias Thorne, Census Bureau, 1890-1895. Inside, among faded letters and official correspondence, was a personal journal. Its cover was worn leather, its pages filled with the same distinctive script. Arthur's heart pounded as he carefully opened it. The early entries detailed Elias Thorne's life as a young, idealistic census enumerator. Elias, a man in his late 20s, had joined the Census Bureau with a fervent belief in the power of data to shape a better nation. He saw his work not as mere tabulation, but as a vital act of civic duty, ensuring every citizen, no matter how remote, was counted, acknowledged, and represented. Elias wrote of his family in upstate New York, his widowed mother, his younger sister. He spoke of his dreams of contributing to the burgeoning American experiment, of bringing order and understanding to the vast, untamed territories. His early assignments were typical: bustling towns, sprawling farms, isolated ranches. He meticulously recorded every detail, often adding personal observations about the resilience and spirit of the frontier people. Then, in an entry dated early spring of 1890, the tone shifted. Elias wrote of receiving a special assignment, a directive from a newly formed Department of Public Health Initiatives, a branch he hadn't heard of before. The assignment was to enumerate a newly established, highly isolated settlement deep in the unorganized territories straddling the Wyoming and Montana borders. The directive emphasized the sensitive nature of the community, citing a need for discreet and thorough documentation due to a unique public health situation. Elias, ever the diligent civil servant, saw it as a challenging but important task, a testament to the government's commitment to even its most remote citizens. He expressed a mix of excitement and trepidation, noting the unusual secrecy surrounding the mission. "A place so remote," he wrote, "that even the maps seem to forget it. But no American should be forgotten." Arthur read on, his fingers trembling slightly. This was it, the genesis of Havenwood. The journal entries provided a crucial, intimate perspective that the official schedules lacked. Elias's initial optimism, his unwavering belief in his mission, made the eventual horror all the more poignant. Arthur imagined Elias, a man of integrity, setting out with his census forms, unaware of the sinister reality awaiting him. He continued to cross-reference, now armed with Elias Thorne's name. He found Elias's official employment records. A brief 5-year tenure with the Census Bureau, followed by an abrupt resignation in late 1895, citing personal health reasons. There were no further records of Elias Thorne in any federal capacity. It was as if he too had been partially erased, his promising career cut short, perhaps by what he had witnessed. Arthur consulted with a few trusted colleagues, presenting his findings with a cautious enthusiasm. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a senior archivist specializing in demographic shifts, listened patiently, her brow furrowed. "Albright," she said, tapping a pencil against her chin. "This is highly irregular. A settlement of over 200 people completely unrecorded elsewhere. It defies logic." "Are you certain there isn't a simple explanation? A misfiled document, perhaps? A temporary camp that disbanded before official recognition?" Arthur shook his head. "I've checked every possible avenue, Eleanor. Land claims, postal routes, even railroad expansion surveys. Nothing. And the observation status column, it's not standard census procedure. It suggests something else entirely." He showed her the journal entries, Elias's growing unease palpable even across the decades. Eleanor's skepticism began to waver, replaced by a look of dawning concern. "This Department of Public Health Initiatives, I don't recall any such federal body existing in 1890 with the authority to establish secret settlements. The Public Health Service was still in its infancy, focused on ports and quarantines, not internal communities." The more Arthur delved, the clearer it became. This was no mere administrative error. This was a deliberate act of omission, a carefully orchestrated disappearance. The names on the Havenwood schedules were not just forgotten, they had been made to be forgotten. And Elias Thorne, the diligent enumerator, was the only one who had dared to record their existence. Arthur felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The implications were vast, terrifying. What kind of public health situation would necessitate the complete erasure of an entire community? He knew he had to follow Elias Thorne's journey to understand what he had seen and why he had gone to such lengths to preserve the truth. The journal, now his most prized possession, became his guide, a fragile bridge across time to a forgotten horror. Elias Thorne, a man whose earnestness was as boundless as the western sky, set out from Cheyenne in the spring of 1890. His journey was a testament to the rugged individualism and relentless spirit of the era. Yet it was also tinged with an unusual sense of foreboding. The instructions he carried were vague, almost deliberately so, directing him to a remote corner of the unorganized territory, a place marked only by a crude X on a hand-drawn map provided by the Public Health Initiatives Office. The official maps, he noted, showed nothing but an expanse of untouched wilderness. His initial days were spent traversing the familiar, if challenging, landscapes of Wyoming. The vast plains stretched out, interrupted by the occasional rise of foothills, the air crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant pine. He rode a sturdy mare, packed with his census forms, a change of clothes, basic provisions, and a trusty rifle. He passed through nascent towns, their wooden facades still raw against the elements, and encountered solitary homesteaders carving out lives from the unforgiving land. These interactions were always cordial, often ending with a shared meal and stories exchanged by the flickering light of a campfire. But as he ventured further north and west, Deeper into the territory where the maps grew sparse and the trails faded into game paths, the atmosphere began to shift. The conversations with the few trappers and traders he encountered grew shorter, their eyes darting nervously when he mentioned his destination. "Havenwood, you say?" An old fur trapper with a weather-beaten face grunted, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Never heard of it, and if I had, I reckon I'd forget it quick." He then turned his back, refusing further conversation. Another time, at a dilapidated trading post, the proprietor, a gaunt man with a perpetual tremor in his hands, grew pale when Elias inquired about the settlement. "Best not to go looking for what ain't meant to be found, son," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Some places, they just ain't on God's good earth." He then busied himself with rearranging dusty tins, his back to Elias, effectively ending the discussion. The silence that followed these encounters was more unsettling than any direct warning. It was a silence heavy with unspoken fears, with the weight of local legends and hushed rumors. Elias, a man of logic and reason, tried to dismiss these reactions as frontier superstition, the natural caution of those living on the fringes of civilization. Yet, the cumulative effect was undeniable. A seed of unease had been planted, and it began to sprout with each mile he traveled. The landscape itself seemed to conspire with the growing dread. The vibrant greens of the plains gave way to a more muted palette of grays and browns, the trees becoming sparser, their branches gnarled and twisted as if in perpetual agony. The air grew still, the usual sounds of wildlife, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, seemed to diminish, replaced by an unnatural quiet. He noted in his journal, "The land here feels held, as if it is waiting for something or perhaps holding its breath. The silence is profound, unlike any I have experienced. Even the wind seems to whisper rather than roar." He found himself constantly scanning the horizon, not for danger, but for an explanation, a sign that would dispel the growing sense of wrongness. After weeks of arduous travel, navigating through increasingly dense pine forests and over rocky, unforgiving terrain, Elias finally reached a high ridge. Below him, nestled in a secluded valley, was Havenwood. It wasn't a sprawling town, but a cluster of buildings, perhaps 20 or so, arranged in a neat, almost geometric pattern around a central, larger structure. A tall, sturdy fence made of thick timber surrounded the entire settlement, its presence stark and imposing against the natural backdrop. It wasn't a stockade, but it certainly wasn't a typical ranch fence either. It looked more like a barrier. No smoke rose from the chimneys despite the cool mountain air. No children played in the dusty lanes, no livestock grazed in pastures. The settlement was eerily still, a silent tableau bathed in the late afternoon sun. Elias dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The warnings of the trappers, the hushed tones of the traders, the unnatural silence of the wilderness. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. This was not a normal place. His census forms, once symbols of order and inclusion, now felt like a flimsy shield against an unknown darkness. He took a deep breath, adjusted his hat, and began his descent into the valley, his heart heavy with a premonition he couldn't shake. If you're finding yourself on the edge of your seat, wondering what Elias will discover, don't forget to leave a comment below with your theories. We love hearing from you. The descent into Havenwood Valley was like stepping into a different world, a pocket of unnatural stillness carved out of the rugged frontier. As Elias drew closer, the details of the settlement became starkly clear. The buildings were uniformly constructed, simple wooden structures painted a dull, faded gray, arranged in precise rows. There was a central, larger building that appeared to be a communal hall or administrative office, and another, slightly smaller, with a distinctive, almost clinical cleanliness to its exterior, perhaps a dispensary or infirmary. The timber fence, which from a distance had seemed merely robust, now revealed itself to be formidable, topped with a single strand of barbed wire, a detail Elias found deeply unsettling. The oppressive silence was the first thing that truly struck him. No barking dogs, no crowing roosters, no distant shouts of children at play. Even the wind, which had been a constant companion on his journey, seemed to die down as he entered the valley, leaving only a profound, almost suffocating quiet. And then there was the smell. A faint, metallic, sweet odor, subtle at first, but growing stronger as he approached the main gate. It was an unfamiliar scent, yet it carried an unsettling undertone, like old blood mixed with something medicinal and cloying. As he dismounted at the gate, a figure emerged from the central building. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a lean frame and a face etched with countless lines, like a map of sorrow. His eyes, however, were what truly captured Elias's attention. A startling pale blue set deep in their sockets, and holding a weariness that seemed to predate his years. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, and his movements were slow, deliberate, as if conserving every ounce of energy. "Good afternoon," Elias offered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "My name is Elias Thorne. I'm with the United States Census Bureau. I'm here to enumerate the residents of Havenwood Settlement." The old man regarded him with those pale eyes, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice soft, raspy, yet carrying an unexpected authority. "I am Caleb Miller, the elder of this community. Welcome to Havenwood." He gestured towards the gate, which, to Elias's surprise, was unlocked. As Elias led his mare through, he noticed two other figures, younger men, standing silently by one of the grey buildings. They were dressed in simple, dark clothing, and each carried a rifle, held casually but purposefully. They watched him with the same unnerving stillness as Caleb Miller, their faces equally pale and devoid of expression. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. These were not typical frontier guards. Caleb led him to a small, sparsely furnished cabin. "You'll stay here," he said. "We have little to offer in the way of comfort, but it is clean." He then sat on a wooden stool, his gaze fixed on Elias. "You wish to know about us, Mr. Thorne? Our names, our ages, our stories?" Elias nodded, opening his satchel and retrieving his census forms. "That is my duty, Mr. Miller, to ensure every American is counted." Caleb let out a soft, dry chuckle that held no humor. "Counted, yes. But for what purpose, I wonder?" He then began to speak, his voice a low monotone, recounting the community's history. He spoke of how, 3 years prior, they had been recruited from various struggling communities across the Midwest. Farmers whose land had failed, miners whose veins had run dry, families displaced by economic hardship. They had been promised a new life, a fresh start in a fertile valley, free land, and a supportive community, all under the benevolent guidance of a special government initiative focused on health and well-being. "They told us it was a chance to build something new," Caleb explained, his eyes distant. "A place where we could escape the diseases of the crowded cities, where our children could grow strong and healthy, free from the consumption that plagued so many. They promised a doctor, resources, a future." He paused, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "And we, desperate and hopeful, believed them." Elias listened, his pen poised over the paper. He asked about their journey, the promises made, the initial days in Havenwood. Caleb described a carefully orchestrated relocation, trains and covered wagons, all managed by stern, uniformed men. Upon arrival, they were told the settlement was a controlled environment for a long-term health study, and they were to remain within the fence for their own protection and for the integrity of the study. As Caleb spoke, Elias observed the other residents. They moved about their daily tasks with a quiet resignation, their faces uniformly pale, their eyes often downcast. He saw children, thin and listless, playing without laughter, their movements slow and deliberate. The metallic sweet smell seemed to cling to everything, a constant subtle reminder of something unseen and pervasive. Later that evening, as Elias began his enumeration, he met Elara Finch, a former schoolteacher from Ohio. She was a woman of quiet dignity, her once bright eyes now shadowed with a profound sadness. "They promised us education, a library, a chance to teach again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Instead, I teach the children what I can, but their minds, they are not as sharp as they once were. The sickness, you see, it takes more than just the body." She spoke of a persistent cough that afflicted many, a gradual wasting away that seemed to touch everyone in Havenwood. He spoke with Thomas Davies, a burly man who had once worked the coal mines of Pennsylvania. Thomas's frame was still powerful, but his skin was a sickly gray, and his breath came in shallow gasps. "They said this valley had clean air, that it would cure the black lung," he rasped, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Instead, it just waits. We all wait." Samuel Sutter, a farmer from Kansas, spoke of the fertile land they were promised. "The soil here is rich, Mr. Thorne," he said, gesturing vaguely towards the fields beyond the cabins. "But the crops, they don't thrive. They grow weak, just like us. And the water, it has a strange taste." Margaret Griggs, a young mother, held her infant son, William Bowen, close. The baby was unnaturally quiet, his skin almost translucent. Margaret's eyes were wide with a silent plea. "They said the doctor would make us well," she whispered, tears welling. "But he only watches. He only writes in his books." It was then that Elias saw him. A man in a crisp white coat emerging from the pristine medical facility. He was tall, with a severe, intelligent face and cold, piercing eyes. This was Dr. Alistair Hendricks, the government physician, the architect of Havenwood. He moved with an air of detached authority, observing the residents with a clinical gaze that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. The doctor nodded curtly at Elias, a gesture that felt more like a dismissal than a greeting. As Elias continued to record names, ages, and the vague occupations, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, forming a picture far more sinister than he could have imagined. The unique public health situation was not a cure, but a confinement. The health study was not about healing, but about observation. The fence, the guards, the pervasive pallor, the metallic sweet smell. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. The residents of Havenwood were not patients. They were specimens. And Elias Thorne, the diligent census enumerator, had just walked into a living tomb. Elias Thorne, armed with his census forms and a growing sense of dread, continued his enumeration. But his mission had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer merely counting people, he was documenting a crime. Each interview became an act of quiet rebellion, a desperate attempt to gather evidence, to give voice to those who were being systematically silenced. He meticulously recorded every detail, not just the required census data, but also the subtle nuances of their stories, the unspoken fears in their eyes, the physical manifestations of their suffering. He learned that the tuberculosis study was a cruel deception. The residents had been told they were susceptible to a new, aggressive strain of consumption, and that Havenwood was a specialized sanatorium, a place where they would receive cutting-edge treatment in a pristine environment. The reality was a stark, horrifying contrast. No treatment was ever administered. Instead, Dr. Hendricks and his small team of assistants meticulously documented the progression of the disease. They measured lung capacity, recorded cough frequency, charted weight loss, and noted the increasing pallor of the skin. They were not healers. They were observers, their instruments cold and precise, their gazes devoid of empathy. Elara Finch, her voice a fragile whisper, described the daily examinations. "They listen to our chests, Mr. Thorne, with cold metal. They take samples of our breath, our blood. They ask us how we feel, but they never offer a remedy. Only more questions. Always more questions. She spoke of the children, their small bodies wasting away, their once bright eyes growing dull and distant. They promised us a healthy future, she repeated, her voice breaking. They promised us life. Thomas Davies, his breath now a constant struggle, confided in Elias about the special tonic they were given. "It tastes of nothing, Mr. Thorne," he rasped. "And it does nothing. It is water, I think. Or worse, something to keep us compliant." He spoke of the guards, the same silent men Elias had seen upon arrival, who patrolled the perimeter and ensured no one strayed from their assigned areas. "They are not here to protect us," Thomas said, a bitter cough racking his frame. "They are here to keep us in." Samuel Sutter, the farmer, revealed a chilling detail. "The doctor, he sometimes speaks of control groups and variables," he muttered, his eyes darting nervously towards the medical facility. "He says our sacrifice will benefit mankind. But what kind of benefit comes from watching people die slowly?" Elias's horror deepened with each confession. He tried to engage Dr. Hendricks in conversation, feigning a professional interest in the study. The doctor, a man of chilling composure, spoke in clinical terms, his voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Thorne, this is a groundbreaking initiative," Hendricks explained, gesturing vaguely towards the pale residents. "We are observing the natural progression of a highly virulent pulmonary affliction in a controlled, isolated environment. The data we are collecting will be invaluable in understanding its etiology and potential future containment strategies. Sentimentality, I assure you, has no place in pure scientific inquiry." When Elias cautiously inquired about treatment, Hendricks's eyes narrowed slightly. "Treatment, Mr. Thorne, would contaminate the data. Our objective is observation, not intervention. These individuals, by their very presence here, are contributing to a greater good." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Elias realized then that Hendricks saw these people not as human beings, but as living experiments, their suffering merely data points in a macabre ledger. Elias's internal conflict raged. He was a federal employee, sworn to uphold the law, but what he was witnessing was a profound violation of every moral and ethical principle he held dear. He knew he couldn't openly challenge Hendricks. The doctor's authority, backed by the armed guards and the impenetrable fence, was absolute within Havenwood. His only recourse was to continue his enumeration, to document the truth in a way that could not be easily dismissed. He began to embed hidden messages within his census notes. In the remarks section where he was supposed to note minor observations, he wrote cryptic phrases. Next to Elara Finch's name, he noted, "Subject expresses profound despair regarding promised education and children's health decline." For Thomas Davies, subject exhibits severe respiratory distress, questions tonic efficacy. For Margaret Griggs and William Bowen, infant shows extreme pallor, listlessness. Mother expresses fear of doctor's observation. He hoped that if these documents ever saw the light of day, someone, someday, would understand the true meaning behind his seemingly innocuous remarks. One evening, while Hendricks was occupied in his laboratory, Elias managed to slip away and approach the medical facility. The building, though pristine, exuded a chilling aura. He tried the door to the records room, finding it, as expected, locked. But through a small, grimy window, he glimpsed stacks of ledgers, charts, and what looked like personal effects. He knew the full story. The true nature of the study lay behind that locked door. The residents, sensing his quiet defiance, began to whisper more freely. Stories of those who had tried to leave, who had attempted to scale the fence or sneak past the guards. "They just disappeared, Mr. Thorne," Caleb Miller confided, his voice barely audible. "No one ever saw them again. The doctor would simply announce they had been relocated for advanced treatment. But we knew. We always knew. The fence, Elias now understood, was not just a barrier. It was a tombstone. The realization solidified Elias's resolve. He would complete his census, every name, every detail, no matter the risk. He would ensure that these 214 souls condemned to a slow, observed death would not be erased from history without a fight. His pen, once a tool of bureaucracy, had become a weapon of truth. If the chilling implications of Havenwood are making your skin crawl, please take a moment to share this video with someone who appreciates a good historical mystery. Let's spread the word about these forgotten stories. The tension in Havenwood was a palpable thing, a heavy shroud that settled over the settlement. Dr. Hendricks, with his cold, calculating gaze, had begun to notice Elias Thorne's meticulousness, his unusual depth of inquiry. It was not the perfunctory tabulation expected of a census enumerator. Elias's questions were too pointed, his observations too keen. One afternoon, as Elias was concluding an interview with a frail, elderly woman, Hendricks appeared, his presence a sudden, chilling shadow. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone, "I understand you've been quite thorough in your duties." There was no warmth in his tone, only a veiled threat. "However, I must remind you of the sensitive nature of this facility. Our residents are delicate, and excessive questioning can be counterproductive to their well-being." Elias met his gaze, feigning an air of innocent diligence. "Of course, Doctor. I merely wish to ensure the most accurate possible record. The Bureau prides itself on its comprehensive data collection." He held up his census forms, filled with names and numbers, and, unbeknownst to Hendricks, his carefully coded observations. Hendricks stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Indeed. But some details, Mr. Thorne, are best left unrecorded. For the sake of national security and for the integrity of this vital public health initiative, certain anomalies must be overlooked. You understand, I trust?" The implication was clear. Elias was to ignore the true nature of Havenwood, to sanitize his report, or face severe consequences. Elias felt a surge of fear, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I understand the importance of discretion, Doctor," he replied, his voice steady. "My report will reflect the official narrative, of course. However, my personal notes for the Bureau's internal records must be complete. It is a matter of professional integrity." He knew he was treading a dangerous line, but he couldn't back down. He had to protect his true documentation. Hendricks studied him for a long moment, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Professional integrity is commendable, Mr. Thorne, but so is loyalty and silence." He then turned and walked away, leaving Elias with the chilling certainty that he was now under direct suspicion. The remaining days in Havenwood were a blur of quiet desperation. Elias worked quickly, completing the last of his interviews, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was likely the last outsider these people would ever see. He spoke with Caleb Miller one final time, under the cover of dusk. "I have recorded every name, Mr. Miller," Elias whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single one. They will not be forgotten." Caleb's pale eyes, filled with an ancient sorrow, met his. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," he rasped, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "We knew we were being erased. To be counted, to be acknowledged. It means more than you can know. Just remember us, remember Havenwood. Tell them we were here." The next morning, Elias was informed by one of the armed guards that his enumeration was complete, and arrangements had been made for his departure. He was escorted to the gate, his satchel containing the precious census schedules and his journal clutched tightly in his hand. As he mounted his mare, he turned for one last look at Havenwood. The residents stood at their cabin windows, pale faces pressed against the glass, watching him leave. Caleb Miller stood by the central building, a solitary, stoic figure, his hand raised in a silent, mournful farewell. The image was seared into Elias's memory, a haunting tableau of quiet suffering. The journey back was fraught with anxiety. Elias constantly looked over his shoulder, convinced he was being followed. He rode hard, taking circuitous routes, avoiding main trails, his mind racing. What would he do with the census? How could he expose the truth without endangering himself, and more importantly, without allowing the government to simply destroy the evidence? Upon his arrival at the regional Census Bureau office in Cheyenne, he was met not with congratulations, but with a stern summons from a senior official, a Mr. Harrison. "Thorne," Harrison began, his face grim, "we've received a rather concerning report regarding your recent assignment. Dr. Hendricks of the Public Health Initiatives has expressed dissatisfaction with your conduct. He claims you were overly intrusive, disruptive to their sensitive operations." Elias felt a cold dread. Hendricks had moved quickly. "Sir, I merely performed my duties as required," Elias stated, trying to keep his voice even. The settlement Havenwood was unusual. The residents were in poor health and their living conditions were peculiar. Harrison slammed his fist on the desk. "Peculiar is not a word we use in official reports, Thorne. Dr. Hendricks's project is of the utmost importance to national health. Your job was to count, not to investigate. Furthermore, your schedules for this Havenwood are problematic. There is no official record of such a settlement. It appears to be a clerical error, a misidentification on your part." Elias's blood ran cold. "Sir, I assure you, Havenwood exists. I was there. I enumerated 214 individuals." He pushed the census schedules across the desk. Harrison barely glanced at them. "These names, Thorne, do not appear in any other federal or territorial records. They are, for all intents and purposes, non-existent. You will revise your report. You will remove all mention of Havenwood settlement and its residents. You will submit a corrected schedule indicating that the area was uninhabited." Elias stared at him, aghast. "But sir, that would be a lie. I cannot erase these people. They are real." Harrison leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You will, Mr. Thorne, if you wish to retain your position, and perhaps your freedom. This is not a request. This is an order from the highest levels. The Department of Public Health Initiatives has considerable influence. Do you understand?" Elias understood. He was trapped. He could fight, expose the truth, but he would be ruined, perhaps even silenced permanently, and the evidence would be destroyed. Or he could comply, outwardly, and find another way. He looked at the census schedules, at the names he had so carefully recorded, at the hidden messages he had embedded. He knew what he had to do. "Yes, sir," Elias said, his voice barely audible. "I understand." He took the schedules back, his hands shaking slightly. He would submit the sanitized report, but the original, the true record of Havenwood, would not be destroyed. He would hide it, along with his journal, deep within the archives, where it might one day be found by someone like Arthur Albright, someone who would understand. He would ensure that even if they were officially never existed, their names would endure. Back in the hushed sanctity of the National Archives in 1937, Arthur Albright felt a profound connection to Elias Thorne. He had followed Elias's journey through the journal entries, felt his initial idealism, his growing unease, and finally, his chilling realization. The confrontation with Harrison, the forced compliance, the desperate act of hiding the true census. It all painted a picture of a man of integrity caught in a web of institutional horror. Arthur now had the full, unredacted Havenwood census schedules, complete with Elias's cryptic remarks. He had Elias's journal, detailing the journey and the observations. But he needed more. He needed to understand the full scope of the government cover-up, the machinery that had allowed such an atrocity to occur and remain hidden for nearly half a century. He began to search for any mention of the Department of Public Health Initiatives. It was a phantom organization, leaving almost no paper trail. However, by cross-referencing dates and personnel mentioned in Elias's journal, Arthur eventually found a series of obscure appropriations bills from the late 1880s, tucked away in congressional records. These bills allocated funds for experimental public health programs in unorganized territories, with vague language about disease containment and population studies. The funding was substantial, and the oversight minimal. He also unearthed correspondence between Dr. Alistair Hendricks and various high-ranking officials in the nascent public health service. The letters, heavily redacted, spoke of promising preliminary results from the Havenwood project, emphasizing the unique opportunity for longitudinal observation and the invaluable data being collected. There were no mentions of patients, only subjects. No discussions of treatment, only protocols. The cold, clinical language confirmed Elias's suspicions. Havenwood was a human laboratory. Arthur's investigation led him to the fate of the Havenwood site itself. He found a single brief government report from 1896 declaring the experimental health facility in the unorganized territory to be decommissioned due to unforeseen environmental factors. No mention of the residents, no explanation of what happened to them. Just a sterile, bureaucratic closure. Driven by an insatiable need for answers, Arthur took a leave of absence from the archives. He packed a small bag, purchased a train ticket, and set out for the remote region where Havenwood was once located. The journey in 1937 was far less arduous than Elias's in 1890, but the landscape remained wild and unforgiving. He hired a local guide, an old rancher named Jebediah Finch, whose family had been in the area for generations. Havenwood, you say? Jebediah squinted, chewing on a piece of straw. Heard old tales about a ghost town out that way. Folks said it just vanished, like the earth swallowed it whole. My grandpappy, he used to tell stories about strange lights and men in dark coats, but he always said it was just fever dreams. After days of travel, they reached the secluded valley. It was overgrown, reclaimed by nature. The sturdy timber fence was gone, likely scavenged for wood. But Arthur found the faint outlines of foundations, the remnants of what had once been the cabins. The central building's foundation was larger, more robust, and near it, the distinct rectangular footprint of the medical facility. The metallic sweet smell was long gone, replaced by the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Yet, a profound silence still hung over the valley. A heavy, mournful quiet that seemed to echo the suffering that had once taken place there. Arthur walked among the ruins, his heart aching. He imagined the pale faces at the windows, the children playing without laughter, the quiet desperation of Caleb Miller and Alara Finch. He picked up a small, rusted tin toy, a child soldier half buried in the dirt, a tangible link to a life that had been officially erased. He spoke to other old-timers in the scattered ranches and small towns nearby. They all had similar stories, hushed rumors, warnings about that valley, vague memories of a time when strangers came and went, and then nothing. No one had ever seen the residents leave. No one had ever heard of them settling elsewhere. They had simply ceased to exist, not just on paper, but in the collective memory of the region. Arthur returned to Washington, his resolve hardened. He had seen the physical evidence of Havenwood's existence and the chilling absence of its people. He had pieced together the bureaucratic machinations that had allowed it to happen. The government, in its pursuit of scientific knowledge and public health, had committed an act of profound dehumanization, erasing 214 lives from the national consciousness. He knew he couldn't let Elias Thorne's sacrifice be in vain. The truth, however inconvenient, however horrifying, had to be preserved. If you're finding this journey into a forgotten past compelling, please consider hitting the subscribe button. We're dedicated to bringing these untold stories to light, and your subscription helps us continue our work. Arthur Albright, back in the quiet solitude of the National Archives, felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He had uncovered a truth so profound, so disturbing, that it threatened to shatter his perception of the orderly world he had always believed in. The meticulous records, the carefully preserved documents, the very foundation of his professional life, now seemed to hide as much as they revealed. He returned to Elias Thorne's journal, now reading the later entries. those penned after Elias's forced compliance and his abrupt resignation from the Census Bureau. Elias's handwriting, once so neat and precise, had become more erratic, reflecting the turmoil within him. He wrote of sleepless nights, haunted by the pale faces of Havenwood, by the metallic sweet smell that seemed to cling to his memory. Elias had tried, in his own quiet way, to expose the truth. He had written anonymous letters to newspapers, to congressmen, to various public health organizations. Each attempt was met with silence, dismissal, or thinly veiled threats. The official narrative, crafted by Dr. Hendricks and his powerful patrons, was too strong, too deeply entrenched. Elias, a lone voice against a formidable institutional machine, found himself increasingly isolated, his claims dismissed as the ravings of a disgruntled former employee. "They have sealed their fate, and ours," Elias wrote in a particularly despairing entry. "The names I recorded, the lives I witnessed are now ghosts, not of the spectral kind, but of the bureaucratic kind, erased by ink and silence. I carry their burden, their forgotten existence, and it is a heavy one." Elias Thorne died in 1920, a relatively young man, his official cause of death listed as pulmonary complications. Arthur couldn't help but wonder if the lingering effects of the Havenwood air, the psychological toll of what he had witnessed, had contributed to his early demise. Elias had taken the story of Havenwood to his grave, but not before ensuring that the evidence, however hidden, would survive. Arthur now faced his own moral dilemma. He held in his hands the undeniable proof of a horrific government experiment, a deliberate act of human erasure. He had the original census schedules, Elias's journal, and the corroborating, albeit heavily redacted, government documents. He could expose it all, bring the truth to light, perhaps even spark a national scandal. But what would be the cost? Would anyone believe him? Would the powerful forces that had orchestrated Havenwood simply bury the story again, perhaps even more thoroughly this time? And what would happen to him, a quiet archivist, challenging the very institutions he served? He thought of Elias Thorne, a man who had tried to fight and had been broken by the system. Arthur realized that a direct confrontation might only lead to the destruction of the evidence and the permanent silencing of Havenwood's story. His duty, he concluded, was not to shout the truth from the rooftops, but to safeguard it, to ensure its survival for a future generation, when perhaps the world would be ready to listen. Arthur spent weeks meticulously organizing the Havenwood documents. He created a new, highly obscure classification code, one that would be almost impossible to stumble upon without specific knowledge. He cross-referenced it with a series of seemingly unrelated, innocuous documents, creating a labyrinthine trail that only he, and perhaps a handful of future equally meticulous archivists, could ever hope to navigate. He placed the original census schedules, Elias's journal, and the supporting evidence into a specially constructed fireproof container, and then, with a heavy heart, he filed it away in a remote, rarely accessed section of the archives. He knew it was a gamble. He was entrusting the truth to the future, to the hope that someone, someday, would follow the breadcrumbs he had laid. He was creating a hidden archive within the archive, a silent testament to the 214 souls who had officially never existed. He reflected on the chilling capacity of institutions to erase, to deny, to rewrite history for their own purposes. Havenwood was not just a place. It was a chilling reminder of the fragility of human existence in the face of unchecked power. If this journey through a hidden chapter of history has left you with a sense of unease and wonder, please consider leaving a comment below. What are your thoughts on Arthur's decision? Would you have done the same? Arthur Albright, now an older man, his hair silvered and his spectacles thicker, would often find himself gazing at the vast, silent rows of archived documents. He had continued his work at the National Archives for decades, a quiet guardian of history, but the memory of Havenwood never faded. The 214 names, meticulously recorded by Elias Thorne, remained etched in his mind, a constant haunting reminder of the lives that had been systematically erased. He never spoke of Havenwood to anyone, not directly. The secret was too heavy, too dangerous, too profound. He had done what he believed was right. He had preserved the truth, hidden it in plain sight, ensuring that it would not be lost forever. He often wondered if his hidden archive would ever be discovered, if another meticulous soul, decades or even centuries later, would stumble upon the anomalous census schedules and follow the trail he and Elias Thorne had laid. The official records of the United States of America, the grand narrative of its growth and progress, continued to omit Havenwood. The maps remained blank where the settlement once stood. The 214 individuals, men, women, and children, remained officially never existed. Their stories, their suffering, their quiet dignity in the face of an unspeakable horror were known only to a handful of men across time, and now to the silent, dusty shelves of the National Archives. Arthur understood that the horror of Havenwood was not in any supernatural manifestation, but in its chilling plausibility. It was the horror of bureaucracy, of scientific ambition untempered by ethics, of the cold, calculated decision to sacrifice human lives for data and then to erase all evidence of their existence. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not mythical beasts, but the systems and institutions created by man himself. He would sometimes imagine Elias Thorne riding into that silent valley, his heart full of purpose, only to discover a living tomb. He would imagine Caleb Miller, his pale eyes filled with ancient sorrow, asking to be remembered. And he would imagine the children, playing without laughter, their small bodies slowly succumbing to a disease that was never meant to be cured, only observed. As the sun set over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the marble halls of the archives, Arthur Albright would close his ledger, his work for the day complete. He knew that somewhere, in the vast, untamed wilderness of the American West, a valley lay silent and overgrown, its secrets buried deep beneath the earth. And somewhere, within the labyrinthine depths of the National Archives, a forgotten census, a testament to 214 lives, lay waiting to be truly discovered, a haunting whisper from a past that refused to be entirely erased. The question lingered, a chilling echo in the quiet halls. How many other Havenwoods, how many other communities of people who officially never existed, still lay hidden, waiting for their truth to be unearthed? The silence of the archives held countless stories, and some, like Havenwood, were best left undisturbed, yet desperately needed to be told.